Okay, so sorry, it's very late. Okay, everybody, sorry about that. Kind of late this time. That's there was just a lot of traffic and some issues, and so I was held out for a very long time. It seemed a very long time on the road. Probably about as long as I've been in the car, probably much longer than we're going to be in this meeting. So, at any rate, so usually, I do all that prep work beforehand, but so I couldn't really do that. So, gosh, thanks everybody for coming tonight. So welcome to the June meeting, Grand Strand Astronomers. Let's see a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. So first of all, we'll talk about observing session. So I understand there were a lot of people at the last observing session. I couldn't make it. Unfortunately, I guess we got clouded out a little bit. So I thank everybody that came. For the feedback, we're going to go ahead and do one this month as well. So we've got it on June 25th. I'm also going to get the ones for the rest of the year posted, but it looks like the best cadence for the rest of 2022 is going to be, meetings on the second Thursday of the month, just like today, and then the fourth Saturday of the month will be observing, right? So it looks like that's going to be the best cadence. I will put that out on the website. I'll also send out all those dates via the email list. Get that done within a week, right? So, and we'll go ahead and get that set up with Hampton and everybody. So right now we're going to go ahead and plan on doing that, and then we'll kind of see how that goes. So I guess the other thing I kind of wanted to, I guess John is here, and John Freitas, our treasurer. I guess I need to remind everybody that dues are due. For those of us that have forgotten to pay dues, which the annual dues are due. So if you've forgotten, you can either get in contact with John. I'm hoping to have a way we can do that online here within the next month or two. I'm going to talk to John about that. So it'll be going through PayPal, but it'll be easier for everybody to do it that way. So we'll talk about that. I guess I also want to talk about meetings as well. So in terms of meetings, we tend to have more people coming in via Zoom than face-to-face. So I wanted to just kind of take everybody's temperature on meetings. Would you rather do something like, would you rather continue having the meetings, or would you rather move the meetings to Zoom only and then maybe do something else, like have everybody go out to eat somewhere for socialization, like once a month or something? And it's not something you have to ping me on right now, but if you could either drop an email or make a comment somewhere, kind of figure out where, you think that's going to be best, what you think the best flow is going to be, right? So it's just something for everybody to think about, right? And I'll put something out on the email as well as on the Facebook as well. So
I do have one thing.
Oh, John needs I'm not sure how everybody can hear him. So.
Oh, anybody hear me? Let me get up there.
Yes,
yeah, why don't you come up here? Why don't you come up here? It's just be a lot
we hear
easier.
him. He's good.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I see you too.
Regarding dues, the Astronomical League dues are due the end of this month. So even if you cannot physically get a check or pay the dues this month or within the next couple of weeks, just let me know so I can include you when I renew the Astronomical League subscriptions. So that's it.
Okay. Thanks, John. Forgot about that. Okay. Does anybody else have anything else before we go ahead and briefly talk about what we're going to talk about tonight? No? Okay. I hope everybody before I get started, I hope everybody got a chance to go out for that meteor shower, but it was kind of disappointing. I was out there. I saw I saw a couple of bright ones. All the ones I saw were bright, but there weren't very many of them. I was probably out from about 12:30 or 12:20 to about 1:40. And most of them I saw were like pretty close to 1 o'clock. Saw a couple of bright gold ones, but it was pretty disappointing. So, you know, but
I saw, 2 nights ago, I saw a very bright, long green one coming from the east. It was probably around 11:15, but that's the only one I saw.
oh wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about something that probably some of you know a lot about. And let's see if I can share my screen. So this is more of a, I put together some pictures. It's a little bit more of a discussion. So if people can, we can talk about what works for them or that kind of stuff, right? So it's not meant to be like a write-only presentation from my perspective, right? So talk a little bit about dew. I've kind of been playing around a little bit with this lately and trying to understand a little bit more and try to figure out, what I can do, right? Because I've always had challenges, especially with SCTs. They seem to be a little more particular about dew, especially down here, right? Because I mean, where we live, you're going to have lots of dew, right? So just real quick to remind everybody what we're talking about, humidity is you're talking about, water in the air, right? Actually, let me turn down the lights 1 second. These projectors are not that bright. Sorry, the projector's not that bright, so in the room, so at least the colors I picked didn't project very brightly. So humidity, it's just basically water vapor in the air, right? On the left-hand side, it's something that's zero. There's no humidity, there's no water vapor in the air, and then something that's completely saturated is on the right-hand side. So you'd have water evaporating and condensing, right? Just sort of in a cycle to kind of keep it in balance, right? And that's really the deal with the air, right? Is that basically air at a certain temperature has a maximum capacity of water vapor it can hold, right? Hold is really probably not the right term because it doesn't actually hold it per se. But basically what you can do is you can basically, depending on the temperature of the air, will control in a given volume, just how much water can be in there, right? And you can see just kind of an example here at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, you can get about 30 grams of water per kilogram of air. But at 40 degrees, you're significantly less. You're only about 5 grams of water per kilogram. So that's part of the key is that as temperature goes down, the air can hold less water, right? And the capacity is, I just put a chart on the right-hand side. I can make these charts available, right? So what's really more important is relative humidity. You hear this a lot. And basically what that just means is for given that the humidity that's in the air, what percentage of maximum capacity, the capacity we just talked about, what percentage is that, right? So how close is it being saturated, right? So on the right-hand side, I've got a 95% relative humidity and a 10%, right? So it's basically, it's going to be dependent, at the same temperature, you can have like on the left-hand side graphic, I've got on the left, the very left one is, that's 100% saturation. Of course, when you get 100% saturation, it's like fog or rain. But on the right-hand side, again, these are the same temperature, right? If you've only got, like half of the amount, it's 50% relative humidity, right? So that's kind of what we care about, right? Is the relative humidity. There are some effects to that capacity. Oh, we already talked about that, like temperature, right? Like if you change the temperature, you're drastically changing the capacity, the amount of water that can be in the air. That also means it's going to it's also going to raise the relative humidity, right? If you just change the temperature, just lower the temperature, because that means it holds less water. That means but you've got the same amount of water in the air, that means the relative humidity is going to go up, right? It also varies a lot. There's something called microclimate effects. It varies a lot depending on where you are. right? Like, so if you're like in a grassy field, you're going to have more relative humidity than if you're like, say, in a big parking lot, right? Just because there's more water vapor that can be evaporating, right? So there's lots of little microclimate effects. There's actually differences between like close to the ground, if you're in a grassy field, like at your ankle level versus like at chest level. There's actually differences in relative humidity. I mean, really doesn't, it's like there's just some little bit of, things you have to look out for, but it's not a huge difference, but it is there. So now we talk about the dew point, which is something else astronomers really care about, right? The dew point is basically when you say you got relative humidity, the dew point basically is what's the temperature, not the current temperature, but what's the temperature you'd have to cool the air to where it would be 100%, right? So the dew point pretty much stays constant dew point doesn't really change that much over the course of a day, right? Like, so you can see, like on the left-hand side, you've got an air temperature of 65, the dew point's 65, relative humidity is 100%, right? But if you're 60% and it's 80 out there, the dew point's not till 65, right? Even lower, kind of low humidities, like 44%, you got 90 to 65. So you got a long way to go, right? So we really care a lot about the dew point because that's when you're going to start having issues, right? Just an example, kind of going through the day of what it would look like. The air temperature starts out cooler in the morning. This is kind of like a spring or a fall day. Rises up to the afternoon and then sinks. And you can see the relative humidity will change pretty much in relation to the air temp, right? Unless something's bringing more humidity in, the relative humidity is going to drop as the temperature goes up. But you also see the dew point kind of stays pretty constant, right? And this is pretty typical for these kind of days, right? So just to give you an idea of temperature versus dew point and relative humidity, just because I like graphs, science guy, I like graphs, right? So you can see on here the various lines, like you see the black line's 100%. So that's the air temperature and the dew point, of course, be the same number. Then you can see the other kind of lines, right? You can actually get a lot of dew point data for observing. This is clear outside, which if anybody's not used that, it's actually a pretty good little app. Tells you about like expected cloud cover, and it may be kind of hard to read some of these things, but it talks about expected cloud cover, and things like that. But one of the things it has both the relative humidity and it has the dew point. So you can get an idea of, how close you're kind of flirting with the dew point, right? Because it's going to make a difference. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Okay, it's lots of science stuff, and it's like, okay, sure, why not? Well, it has to do with radiational cooling. This is the same sort of effect that we get. There's another weather graphic off one of the weather channels that shows, like, if you notice, like, especially in the winter, when you have a clear night, it cools off really fast, right? And it cools off because there's a lot of radiational cooling. So the Earth will radiate a lot of energy out into space. And when you look at the temperature of the sky, it's actually very low, right? So you get a lot of this radiational cooling. That's why if you have clouds, if you've got a lot of clouds, it tends to absorb a lot of the heat and radiate it back down, right? So it's actually a pretty effective insulator, right? So when you have clouds, you don't get that radiational cooling. Of course, for us, if you have clouds, then you'll not be outside, right? So for us, it's a factor, right? The same sort of thing applies for telescope tubes, right? Your telescope optics and your optics, your glass, and the tubes themselves actually radiate a lot of energy, right? So they'll actually do very efficiently cool as the temperature goes down. Now, what's the problem? Well, the problem with that is that as you look at a good radiator, what will happen is it will cool to less than the ambient temperature, right? Because the ambient temperature is doing some heat transfer by conduction, right? So there's a little bit of that coming from the air. That's not very efficient. The radiational cooling is much, much more efficient. So what happens is the temperature starts dropping, and it will drop below the temperature of the air. And then that little air layer over the top will start cooling off, right? But what happens when you cool it off, of course, is then in that little section of air, it can hold less water, and so you can get dew to form. And that's why dew kind of forms on all these surfaces first, whether it's car, the grass, or whatever. That's why it kind of forms that way. It doesn't fall. That's a really common myth, is dew kind of doesn't fall from the sky. It actually just forms close to that. The same thing with when you get the frost forming on it. Frost is not frozen dew. Frost is actually a process, instead of condensation, it's called deposition. It actually goes right to ice, because of this temperature inversion, right? So the trick is you got to watch out for this. That's the thing with telescopes, right? So for unshielded telescope, you have to forgive the graphic. I mean, I don't have a good graphic for any of this, right? But think about if you have just your lens, so say you got SCT, you just have it, you pull the cover off and you point at the sky. It's pointed at this really cold sky, and it's going to radiate a lot of energy, right? So that means it's going to dew up, and it's true with anything. But SCTs are some of the worst because they don't have. I mean, the lens is right at the end, right? So basically, you're going to get an unshielded telescope. You're going to have like this 180-degree span when you're looking at the sky, and you've got a lot of radiation, way it radiates out, right? So that's why, and you see it on a lot of refractors, but a lot of things have passive dew control, like they have these dew shields, right? And all they do is basically, instead of having 180 degrees of the sky, you have a much smaller view of the sky, so you get less radiational cooling. It just slows down the radiational cooling. So it does work if you don't have, the potential for a lot of dew. Unfortunately, down here, not so much, because we have a lot of humidity, so it doesn't take much cooling to really start getting dew, right? And by the way, once you get dew, it's really, really hard to get rid of it, right? You can't just wipe it off, right? So passive dew control, and this is why you notice a lot of the refractors that are sold also have a little dew cap on here, basically a little extension. Again, it just helps it with the radiational cooling. It also keeps some of the stray light out, so that's kind of cool too, right? But so when you have this passive dew shield, it works great. Of course, then that's not really enough, right? The next level that a lot of people use is fan cooling, right? So this can be used in a couple of different ways. I don't really have a good picture of it. Some people are using it for SCT by inside the dew shield right there. They're actually mounting a little fan, like a little radio fan, like the kind you would put in a computer. And the trick is it keeps the air moving around. So what it means is you don't build up that layer of cold air, and it will prevent dew up to a point. So if you've got a pretty good margin on the dew point, you can actually use that. And I actually tried this when we were out in April, the observing session at Hampton Plantation. And I actually just had a little radio fan mounted in my dew shield for my SCT, and I just ran that, and it was dry all night. So it actually works. Now, this is actually very commonly used on reflectors, right? Because what tends to happen is the mirrors tend to cool off, and they can also build up a little. The currents coming off the mirror can also really, kind of disrupt the seeing inside the telescope, right? Because I had a friend who had a big 12-inch Newtonian. And he had a fan mounted in the side by the mirror, and you could go and look at that, and you could look at it, and the seeing would be okay. And then you could see he would flip that switch on that fan, and it would clear up. It would clear up just like that. So it helps keep it move around, right? And again, this works up to a point, right? And you might think the vibrations would be a problem. Most of the current fans it really isn't a problem. A lot of people on cloudy nights should do this and don't see a problem. Unfortunately, here you need to do a little bit more sometimes. So you have to add heat, right? So that's dew strips, the common dew strips. And I have some examples here, some homemade ones, right? Some people just solder a bunch of resistors together, which is really what dew strips really are. They're just basically usually like nichrome wire or something that actually has a resistance, and the resistance generates heat, right? So you can go ahead and put those on. And that adds a little bit of heat in, so that you're not letting the optics cool and then in turn cool the air to that dew point.
Excuse me, Ian,
Yeah,
can you go back to that photograph? That
which
slide?
one? This one?
Yeah, the one on the left. Did you know the value of those resistors? I've seen this in the past.
I don't know. I can't remember. I actually don't know. I kind of bogue this image from the internet.
Okay, I'll look for it.
You know, I think you can look at Dew Buster. I think if memory serves, and it doesn't always, I think Dew Buster, they make a smart controller. I thought they had a thing on building your own heating strips.
If you can give me
Yeah.
the colors of the resistors, I'll be able to tell you.
I'm sorry?
If you can give me the colors of the resistors, I'll be able to tell you.
Yeah, so, so what I can do is I can look it up when I go home. Yeah, I know there's a site or two that tells you how to build these. So I'll try to take a note and send an email out after the meeting. How's that? I haven't done it for a while. I did do this for my, I did it for my Telrad. And so I actually built a small, I built a little resistive strip for my Telrad, right? So again, I'll take a note and we'll get back to people on that. What you can, it's pretty easy to build your own strips. So kind of, if you have something kind of custom, it's kind of nice to do that. Of course, with SCTs, you really need to use them, right? Some people actually put the dew heaters, the SCT, they put the dew heaters inside the dew shield, right? And actually heat the air there. And I guess that works. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but people do use it. When you use them with SCT, so it's a little bit tricky trying to get the heat in. You can see on the upper left, there's the way they really recommend you do that. Not on the outside ring, but on the tube body itself to try to get some heat in there, right? So that rather than on the ring itself, I think that works best. But still, it's a little bit tricky getting enough heat onto the corrector, right? Especially if it's really, really, it's very, very dewy. Really, in my experience, and other people who have SCTs can talk about it, but in my experience, you have to have the dew shield as well, even if you've got the heating strip wrapped around it. I mean, it just doesn't really, and you've got to start it like right away, right? But that's kind of been my experience, right? Interesting thing, of course, is that Celestron has something new out. They actually now still sell these dew rings that actually kind of screw into your the corrector, the little retainer, the corrector retainer. So you actually put that inside. These are actually kind of cool because first of all, you don't have to worry about breaking, about the elastic straps and everything breaking or the wires breaking inside the regular dew strips. You can actually, but you have to, of course, buy it for one particular type of scope, right? But this is actually something new, and they also, of course, have a dew controller to go with it, of course, right? But they have this this setup now, so to try to maybe kind of combat dew a little bit, right? So dew heaters are the heat, right? So that's a bad pun, but that's you just put a dew heater on, you crank it up. Well, not exactly. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Not exactly, right? Because part of the problem you get, and you get this with any of these closed tubes, especially SCTs and Macs. Macs are notorious for this. Is what you get, and it's a little less worse with the carbon fiber ones, but especially with the metal ones, is you get these tube currents rolling in these things, right? So if you just take yours outside on a cool night, so you take it out in the winter right from the house, what's gonna happen is the top of it's going to cool off, right? And it's also the lens will also cause these tube currents, but it'll get even worse if the top of when the top of the telescope cools, and it'll start these rolling currents inside the tube, right? As the top gets cooler and cooler, you'll get these rolling currents inside the tube, right? And you can see them, right? And it's surprising how big an effect it has. I don't have any pictures from mine, but I pulled this off here. Anybody kind of guess A, B, and C? Where does A come from? So let me put a little context here rather than be totally opaque. This is if you take like an SCT, and now all of you are familiar with collimation, right? You point at a bright star and you defocus it, right? You're going to get this airy disk and these concentric rings, right? This one happens to be really well collimated because everything's concentric, right? So, okay, that's what you're looking at. And you see in A, what do you think causes A? Nobody fails for guessing.
Seeing conditions.
Seeing conditions, that's exactly right, Chris. If that's going to be atmospheric seeing, and there's not much you can do about that. Well, there's actually nothing you can do about that, right? What about B? B is tricky. That's actually going to be if you've got some low-level currents from the ground kind of cooling off and kind of like circling around in the ground, rather than looking at the sky. If you've got that, you're going to see something more like B. Now C, well, you can pretty much guess what C is. This is tube currents. And you can see kind of usually be like a mix of A and C. But you can see just how much it's really kind of smearing it out with the tube currents. And depending on your tube and how long it takes to get acclimated, right? Although it'll never be fully acclimated because the lens will keep cooling off. It gets better after it gets closer, but still it'll keep going. So one of the challenges you get, and like I said, it's especially true with the Max, the little Max, you can get like the Orion Max, which are great scopes, but every one of them needs some control for passive tube current control. And this is a kind of an example of that on this particular reflector, right? So they got a dew shield on it that's got what is wrapped in is something called Reflectix. Buy this stuff at Lowe's. You buy a roll of this stuff for not much money, and it's basically an insulating layer. And they've also got it wrapped around near where their mirror cell is. Actually, for the SCTs and the Max, you want to basically insulate the tube itself. Found this out years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago. One of our club members had a Mac, and he brought it out and he's like, look at this. And then he had this Quaker Oats box, which is just like that big Quaker Oats tube thing they used to come in. And he basically had cut a slit down of it so he could slide it over his tube. He put it on, and it's amazing how much it really cleared up the tube currents after a very short period of time. So I definitely use the Reflectix, and I just wrap around the tubes. And it does really help with these tube currents. I don't know if anybody else has done that. But I also flocked the inside of one of them, which I think helped, right? Because the flocking adds a layer of insulation. I flocked it because I thought that would help cut down on stray light. Honestly, the scopes are so good these days, I don't really think that flocking made a difference. But, it was, gave me a chance to work on the scope and do a bunch of stuff anyway. So, and finally, that's why you have these dew controllers that actually you can actually put in a varying amount of heat, because you don't want to put too much heat in, because if you put too much heat in, you're going to ruin your seeing. And it really makes a big difference. Things like the Dew Buster, I have no relationship with Dew Buster, is of course, they actually use temperature probes and try to figure out exactly how much heat to put in. Or you get simpler ones like this is the Thousand Oaks on the left, right, where you can just set various levels. You don't even have to buy one of these, actually. They make these like LED controllers, these 12-volt LED controllers that you can get on Amazon for like $4. And basically, they've got one knob on them, that you can set. And basically, it's going to, you can basically just hook those up to a 12-volt source, and then just connect the dew strip connections to it, and voila, you've got like a $4 controllable dew heater. I've got a couple of those kicking around that I bought when I was playing around with some dew heaters. So it's really easy. If you want to make your own dew strips, you can. If you want to make your own controllers, you can. It's actually really not that hard to do, right? It's not really any sophisticated electronics in this. Because you'll find that the dew strips and especially the dew controllers can be a little bit pricey. And again, whether you need that or not, I mean, you can, if you pretty much just kind of keep an eye on it, you can kind of use the dew controllers, right? So I was just kind of curious if anybody else has tried anything else or had any other experiences related to that. I know I have a terrible time with dew if I've got to be really careful, especially with my SCTs, because they just dew up really fast.
You can get full refractors. You can use some camera dew heaters. You can get, they cost about $15 and they plug into a USB port and they're really good.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Chris?
So for refractors, if you've got a smaller aperture, you can use there's some camera dew heaters out. You plug them into a USB port and they only cost about $15.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And you can string a couple of them together as well because they're Velcro.
Really cool. Maybe you could send out a link as an example.
Yeah, sure.
That'd be great. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot. It really makes a big difference. I definitely attach it to my camera when I connect up my camera out in the. When I take my camera out just to do either, like very wide field shots, and I definitely use the dew heaters as well. It makes a big difference. So. Unfortunately, you just got to do that here, and you really need to do that now. Some people, you see this picture on the bottom. Some people actually do heat everything. Like I said, I did my Telrad at one point, and it does work, but I honestly don't use it that much. And because once I get aligned, I'm pretty good. And a lot of people do it with the eyepiece. I tend to just cover the eyepiece when I'm not using it, though. Or you can kind of keep it in your pocket, that tends to work just as well. I mean, most of the time, for me, I mostly just do the. If I've got a guide scope, of course, I'll do heat that if I'm doing photography. But that and the main objective, right? Now, occasionally, when I've had a lot of dew, what I've done for the camera. It's like, because I just use a DSLR, right? I actually like cut open like a plastic bag, like a freezer bag or something, and I'll actually put that over the camera to kind of keep the dew off the camera, because I've never been too sure sometimes how much dew some of these DSLRs can take, right? And you have to be careful it doesn't heat up too much, but at the same time. But they do sell a lot of stuff like they sell these little 12-volt hair dryers and things to add heat, so you can take dew off. And in reality, those aren't really great investments, I would say, because it turns out that as soon as you start using them, you're going to heat up the front objective a lot, and it's going to radiate, do a lot of radiative cooling really fast. And once you start using them, you end up using them a lot. So really, it's a much better, at least my thought, is it's much better to actually get a handle on it or kind of get ahead of it. And once you're ahead of it, you're in pretty good shape, right? Maybe everybody knew all this stuff. I don't know. But it was good for me to go back and review all the dew formation process, right? And I'd seen a little bit about it. I knew Celestron was doing something, but I didn't know they were doing the ring. I didn't really know much about the rings until I actually looked at it, for getting this presentation ready. So Chris, yeah, you were saying that that there's a number of them that run off 5 volts instead of 12, like for the cameras. So you
Yeah,
have to,
I've put a couple in the chat box.
so that's pretty cool because if you just got your either your laptop out or a mini PC, that's going to have USB ports on it, um, for the camera. So that would be pretty cool. And you don't need to be a lot, right? You don't really need to have those strips cooking, right? You'd be surprised. Not much heat makes a big difference, right? You're just trying to keep ahead of it, without really going bananas. Well, so that's all we had for the presentation stuff. Again, because it will be more of a discussion. It's curious. Did people get out to see the eclipse?
I went out and saw the totality part.
Yeah, the totality. Yeah, so I basically went out for totality. And it's funny because when it first started, for me it was just a little bit in the clouds, but then it kind of popped out, and so I was able to get a few shots, which I haven't had a chance to process yet, and see it. So I didn't do one of those long timed exposures because we had so many clouds to begin with, right? But for totality, it was pretty amazing because it was a pretty deep eclipse, because it was pretty close to the center line, and so the full moon got very dark, and it was definitely worthwhile.
For me, Ian, down here in Charleston, about 20 minutes before, nothing but clouds. I had my camera all set up to take photos. It was beautiful before, and then the clouds rolled in and saw nothing.
Yeah, they were around, and right after totality, I started getting some thin clouds too. So I was like, okay, I'm going to bed. But fortunately we had this great break, just right around totality, at least where I was. I don't. Well, Ronnie's he doesn't live that far from me. So
When I was out, I went out at the beginning and then shortly after Matt's quit, and I had no problem.
yeah, so down where we were on the southern part of the Strand, yeah, it was really clear for the maximum. So we just got really lucky with that. So
Yeah, it was really clear up near Andover.
okay, so pretty much all over the Grand Strand then, yeah. So we got lucky. It probably would have made for, unfortunately, originally we were talking about having a public event, but it probably wouldn't have made for a very good public event because most of it was clouds. So maybe next time we can try that. I do want to still try to get a public event going in December for Mars. So I think that's going to be pretty good, and plus we'll have, since it's for multiple nights, we can pick a good night. Maybe pick an alternate or two. Plus, school will be in session. So right now, Coastal's not. So if we do something here, and we don't just have to do it here, we can do something somewhere else if anybody has any ideas. But we could, if we do something here, we've got not only this population, but we'll get, I think, a lot of advertising. So I kind of like to think about doing that, as well as seeing if we could arrange another couple of public observings in the fall. If anybody has any ideas where. Summers are kind of tough because it gets dark so late, and but we can try to see what we can do in terms of setting something up for the fall. So and we continue to work on the dark sky park for Hampton Plantation. It's a long process involving the IDA and involving the state of South Carolina. So there's a plan in place, a suggested plan that I believe is still going through the state to make sure.
Hey, Ian,
Yes.
Yeah, Gerald isn't here, but the ranger came over and talked to us last time we were down there, and he said that I guess they got new management and they're not going for it.
What?
Okay, so they're not going to go for the plan that we talked about then.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, okay. Well, whether or not we get a dark sky park certification, it's still going to be available for us to do our observing. It just
Yeah.
won't be one where you can just go out on a whim. You can't just go out on a whim in terms of like, oh, I'm going to go out right now, right? We certainly can probably arrange some on the spur observing, spur of the moment observing if we need to, but it's going to need like just a little bit of notice, right? So we'll just have to carry on with that. I don't know. I know Chris had sent me something about another potential site that, I apologize, Chris, I have not had any bandwidth to follow up with you about that.
So I've got a friend of mine who lives a bit inland of Conway, and I mean, it's nowhere near as dark as Hampton Plantation, but it's still pretty dark. And he said we're welcome to go down there anytime we want. It's obviously got to give him a call first.
Right. So that may be another alternative for spur of the moment observing. You said that's out like Conway area or Conway Aner?
It's just inland of Conway.
Okay. So
I'm going to kind of map quickly and see if I can give you a better description of where it is.
So we'll kind of follow up on that. So we'll still have places to go observing, even if they don't get the dark sky park. And again, Hampton has been really good to us. It has restrooms and, it has very dark skies. So we're going to continue to use that. They seem to be amenable to us doing that. It's a good opportunity. One thing about having a dark sky site for anybody who's doing astrophotography, it's amazing how much more you get done at a dark sky site. You have to expose not only shorter exposures in a light polluted site, but you have to expose longer. So, the darker it is, you can get a lot more done in one night that maybe it would take you a couple nights from your house, right? So there still is a benefit to having a dark sky site. And when the conditions are good, it's excellent. I mean, when we were out there Gerald and I were out there in April, the April observing session, we had 20 people come out, including some people that came from Florence, 20 guests that came out to observe. And it's actually interesting. I'm sorry, was that a question from somebody? No, sorry. It was actually interesting because I hadn't anticipated all those people out there. And the transparency wasn't great. The scene was pretty good. But it actually turned out to be a really good night out there. And so it's interesting because, we had to show them some things, right? And so I thought about my Celestron. I had my AVX out there, and I said, "Oh, it's got a sky tour mode, right? Where you can tour the sky, and it starts from one horizon to another, and starts, brings up objects. You can kind of page through, right? Objects. It's funny." And I actually did that to find some things. It's funny because so I probably had not necessarily go-to mounts that long. I mean, probably only 10 years for go-to mounts. Well, maybe not even that long, but I've had digital setting circles for 25, 30 years, right? They've all had these sky tour modes. I never, ever used it. It's the first time I've ever used it. So it was pretty funny because it's like, oh, I'll just use the sky tour mode. Maybe it'll show me what's up and kind of walk me through the sky. And it did. So it's actually pretty cool for public observing. So, I guess old dogs can learn new tricks, right? So again, it's not something I ever push the button on, ever, because usually I kind of knew what I was going to go for, and I would just call up and say, "Oh yes, I'm going to, I'm going to look at M81 or M82 or M33 or M51." So M81, M82 look great from Hampton Plantation in April. So yeah, I definitely encourage anybody that's not gone down there to go down there, because it's definitely worth the trip when the skies are good. When the skies are good, of course, right? And there are a lot of bugs in the summer, so just be prepared. I guess everybody kind of discovered that when they were out there in May. But either get the mosquito repellent clothing or, spray bug spray. So most of the bug spray I use, I don't use the DEET. Although it seems like the DEET's getting a little bit better. It used to be a lot of the DEET bug sprays that weren't polymerized actually interact with plastic and would actually destroy plastic. So you kind of had to be really sensitive what you touched. It seems like that's not as big a problem lately. I don't know if anybody else has had any experience with that, but it seems like it's not as big a problem with, when I say lately, in the last 5 years or so. So, because that's kind of why I switched to not using DEET-based sprays.
Yeah, no matter what I use, I always take some rubbing alcohol, and at least clean my fingertips.
Yeah. So because I always started being real careful, because I had some early on, I had some plastic things kind of get destroyed. It makes this reaction. It makes them like permanently sticky or a little soft and sticky. And I realized it was it was some of the DEET, some of the bug sprays, right? I've always been kind of careful about that, but it seems like it's not as bad as it used to be. But I was kind of feeling around, see if anybody else had any experience, because most of my bug sprays probably pretty old, right? Because don't use them that much, right? So, I use the alternative to DEET, the Picadarn, quite a bit. That's when I switched to it, was to avoid that, right? So it definitely also reminds you to like spray your shoes or your boot when you're spraying bug spray. Because we do get ticks around here. So definitely spray your shoes or your boots, and it'll be worth it. Now, I've also used some of the mosquito clothing, and I don't know whether other people have done that or not. It's the permethrin treated ones. They treat it with permethrin, which is like a poison for bugs. And, if any bug starts crawling on you, it basically picks up enough of it that it's a goner, right? It seems to work pretty well too. So they make it, you can buy them, you can buy permethrin treated clothes, and they're good for like 70 washings. So you can also treat your own, although if you try to do that, there's a lot of warnings on the permethrin treating, because you really got to be really careful if you try to treat your own, right? It's not great stuff when you work with the raw stuff. So, but that's just a couple of suggestions, right?
I use concentrated citronella oil, comes in a small ampule, and that works pretty well. You don't have to put a lot on.
Oh yeah, that works pretty well.
Yeah, we used to use it in Africa. It worked fine there. It seems to work okay here too.
Well, I guess it makes sense, because you can have, in Africa, mosquitoes are pretty serious business.
Yeah, I went up to Kariba once, and I met a guy there, and I hadn't taken any anti-malaria tablets. And this guy had got a small bottle of spray. So I said, "Look, do you mind if I borrow a bit?" And he says, "Yeah, just be careful with it." He says, "We get it from South Africa and we have to import it." So I said, "Yeah, sure." So I started spraying myself, and I said, "Have you got any serious problems with malaria up here?" He says, "Yeah, we've got this cerebral malaria, kills you within 5 hours. You get headache and die." So I almost emptied the bottle on me. I said, "I'll post you another couple of bottles back up."
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's pretty serious business in some parts of the world. Mosquitoes are pretty serious business. So, you can still get things here, but it's not with the occurrence you can get other places. Yeah. Most, I think, especially, and all the vaccines, like all my yellow fever and dengue vaccines and everything. Yeah, so, but that's part of that too. So, yeah, so that's kind of where we are, for everything. Is again, it's kind of a short night tonight. I didn't have anything formal. I thought maybe we kind of talk about any ideas, or I appreciate Chris, you sharing your ideas, for the 5-volt dew heaters, right? Again, I would recommend anybody the little fans that I put inside my dew shield for when it's not too dewy, or they work great. I mean, you can buy like a 5-pack on Amazon for a couple of bucks, and they're 5-volt fans. They can be, again, they can be hooked right up to USB, and they work great. I was a little worried about the vibration, even though they don't really have much vibration, but it was not an issue. And I just put it inside the dew shield itself and just tilted it a little bit, right? So it would get, instead of just going in like circles like this, it would get something going like that, right? Against the objective. And it was amazing. It just kept it clear. Now, again, that wasn't a horrible dew night. I mean, we're kind of getting into with the high humidity right now, we're getting into like, if you got it, bring it, right? But it did help a lot. So I was actually kind of surprised at how much it really did help. So I noticed, I got the idea from Cloudy Nights, and a lot of people are actually doing it, and said that it was kind of a neat idea, right? And it's a little do-it-yourself project you can do, right?
I put a reflector about, I don't know, probably 6 months ago. It's a meter long, and the primary wasn't getting chewed up. There's a fan at the bottom of it, pretty similar to what you described earlier, but the secondary kept getting misted up. So I bought some aluminum down at, I think it was Lowe's or Harbor Freight. It was difficult to work with, and it's black on the inside and white on the outside, so it's perfect. And I extended the tube by about 40%. It looks a bit ridiculous, but it's never dewed up since.
Right. So yeah, it's funny, like, wow. So just doing the dew shield itself, right?
Yeah, there's a picture of it on the group website. Let me see if I can find
Yeah.
it.
So a lot of people, I've got a reflector that I use for imaging, 8-inch, and I basically got a little nichrome wire wrapped around the secondary that you can, and I put a little plug in the outside of the reflector. You can plug in a power cable to it, and it just heats up the secondary, right? Oh, there you go.
Whose scope is that?
That would be Chris Taylor,
Oh, okay.
the person who was speaking.
Nice. By the way, did y'all hear about the damage to the James Webb Telescope?
I read something about it, but I haven't seen anything too detailed on it.
Just a couple of the mirrors got damaged by some small meteorites, so they got to learn how to adjust it to correct for it.
That does happen. Yeah, I remember one time from when I was working, when I did reference flocking my scope, and so I flocked it. I took it all apart. My SCT took it all apart. I actually drilled a big hole in the base to put a fan in to get to cool it off faster. Right, I really went nuts. Right, and just in the process, I dropped one of the little nuts from the inside. Dropped it on the primary mirror.
Ooh.
That's this little tiny ding. But it was relatively new scope, so I was pretty upset about it, and I didn't know really what to do about it. I remember posting in the group, and this is a long time ago, okay? I remember posting in one of the groups at the time, and I'm not even sure which group or which platform it was on, but certainly nothing's around today. And I remember posting in an astronomy group and being kind of concerned about it. And I remember I got an email from some guys at this observatory who they had, I guess, let go an employee, and the employee had come back and like shot a couple of holes in their primary mirror, like a 45. And they're like, yeah, we just put some electrical tape over it. And he said, yeah, don't worry about it. You'll never see it. So I felt a lot better about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I've got it's a 12-inch mirror. I've got a Zygo report on it. It's been configured to within a tenth of a wavelength across the surface, and that's got like a tiny hairline scratch on it. And the same thing, the guy said, "Don't worry about it. You'll never see it."
You'll never see it. It's amazing. It's one of those things that kind of freaks you out. Like I said, this is the first real telescope I ever had, and it was like it freaked me out because I was like, I just ruined it, you know. And it's like, and it's so small. Like I probably couldn't even. I probably had trouble seeing it now, but you know, like it looked, you know, as big as a mountain, of course, to me at the time, right? You know, so, but yeah. So yeah, the fans work pretty well for the Newtonians as well, right? But it's interesting. I never thought about the dew shield, Chris. I should probably try that 8-inch one I have. I should probably try that because that does have a bit of a problem with dew sometimes. And I have basically these heating mats against the mirror, and like I said, the wire running around the secondary, right? I actually didn't do it. I bought it from a friend who'd already kitted all this stuff up. But I never really thought about doing the dew shield part, right? Probably also helps with the stray light because I'm doing it from the driveway. Probably like most of you, I have a lot of stray light.
Is it you say it's a reflector, right?
Yes.
I may have some of that material left over. I'll take a look and let you know.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of reflectics, I think. I think I still have some reflectics. I don't know. I'll have to look. Again, when I bought it at Lowe's, they sell it a lot. that silvery insulation I showed you, that's what I have my tube wrapped in, and what my dew shield is wrapped in. And again, they sell it at Lowe's, not Home Depot, but they sell it at Lowe's. And basically, what it is, it's almost like aluminum foil, and then it's got like bubble wrap inside of it. It's actually an excellent insulator, and it's cheap. And so it's really easy to cut, and so I just cut it and Velcro it and duct tape and make so I just cut like a custom jacket for my SCT. And I put it around the dew shield as well. I don't know if I have any left yet. I'll have to see, but I'd be interested to see what you have, Chris, too, the stuff you got, because at least it's color matched.
Yeah, and it's black. It's like a matte black on the inside as well, so you're not going to get any reflections in there.
Yeah. And where did you get that?
I got it from, I think it was from Lowe's.
Okay.
It was I think it was used for flashing. I'd got a bee in my bonnet. I knew I was having dew issues, and I was just walking around Lowe's looking at everything, thinking, what could I use for this? And I picked it up and I was like, man, that's perfect. It was really difficult to work with because you're trying to configure it and shape it, and I riveted it. And it was quite difficult to hold it in shape while I was riveting as well on my own. Two people, it'd probably be easy enough.
Huh. I'll have to, definitely have to look at that. Yeah. The Reflexic's pretty easy to work with, but it's not dark inside. So you definitely have to have something inside of it. So, buy some kind of dark. I don't know if they still make the dark material like the Protostar stuff, but Protostar used to have this dark flocky material that was adhesive, so you could put it on the inside. Because I've actually got a couple small dew shields for my finder scope and everything that I made out of it. And it was really good because not only was it dark, but they also guaranteed it wouldn't fuzz or shed any particles. So I have no idea whether you're still in business. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and thanks everybody who's on the live stream. I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream here.